Welcome back to the Black Lion Blueprint, the podcast that breaks through the noise and helps fighters train smart, recover better, and show up strong, both physically and mentally. I'm Coach Frederick, and today we're digging into one of the most common mistakes I see fighters and coaches make: misusing conditioning. Conditioning isn't just running more or throwing in random circuits when you're feeling tired, and it's not the thing that's going to fix every performance issue. In fact, done wrong, it can take you further away from your peak. This episode will help you understand when conditioning actually helps and when it gets in the way. Before we dive in, though, I want to say this: I'm not here to claim this is the only way to train. What I am sharing is based on my experience, what I've seen work, and what I've learned through coaching fighters in real time, and how I think about conditioning fighters for high performance. As always, I'll be looking at my notes, but let's get right into it. So, if you're sparring, drilling, rolling, and hitting pads consistently, you're already doing more conditioning than you think. The real problem often isn't your gas tank, it's how you move, how you recover, and how you pace yourself. Here's the truth: conditioning isn't just about getting yourself tired, it's about moving efficiently, fight IQ, strength and mobility, recovery between efforts. If you're leaking energy from poor movement, panic pacing, or bad sleep, you'll always feel like you're out of shape, no matter how much conditioning you do. So, jumping right into some of the common mistakes I see, the first one is adding extra cardio out of fear. I've seen this in many of the fighters that I've trained that, let's just say, they feel like they're gassing out inside of their conditioning work. When it comes to pad work, drill work, sparring, or whatnot, they feel a little bit more fatigued. But I always try to teach, okay, so, how much sleep did you get the night before? How was your nutrition, your hydration? I always try and harp on those things. If those things are out of place or they're inefficient, then I say, okay, it's probably not the conditioning aspect. It's that your body doesn't have enough energy. Your body doesn't have enough fuel in order to perform at its best. So it's trying to conserve that energy because it's overly fatigued at the moment. So any further push will push the body over the edge, and then that's when you get people that get sick all the time. Their body starts to break down. They feel sore and fatigued very consistently. And then also it comes from us coaches too. Sometimes I remember earlier on, I was just like, oh man, I don't want my fighters to go in and get beat because they got outpaced or whatnot. But one of the biggest things that I overlooked was, like I said, really harping on the lifestyle stuff. Because no matter how much more conditioning I throw at them, it doesn't matter if they're not doing the other things for their body to adapt to the conditioning. Really, it's just kind of breaking down type of work. The next mistake I usually see is confusing soreness or fatigue with poor conditioning. So, as I mentioned before, poor sleep, poor nutrition, hydration, stress management, and too much volume of training overall. This could come from volume in your strength and conditioning work, or this could come from volume and intensity inside of your actual skill work that you're doing on a day to day basis. So, if you're always feeling sore, if you're always fatigued, you have to think, okay, once again, the first things, how are all the things that I'm doing outside of the gym? Am I getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night? Am I taking naps as well? Sometimes, if you can't afford it, you might want to take naps because you're putting your body through so much extra stress. Am I eating enough, and am I eating the right things? So the fuel that's going to allow your body to perform at its peak. Hydration, am I hydrating afterwards? There's a lot of sweat that goes into, drilling, sparring, all of those things. And if you're not rehydrating appropriately, then you're reducing your body's ability to pretty much put out good amounts of effort. Stress levels. If you have chronic high stress levels, from, it could be relationships, it can be from your work stress, it could be financial stress. If you have those chronic stressors going on, that reduces your body's ability to recover from the other stress that you're putting on top of the stress that you do have going on. So it's okay if, like, the stress comes here and there, but if it's chronic, if it's something that you're always dreading when you go back home or whatever it may be, then that's going to impede your ability to perform at the highest level. So you always want to make sure that you're doing your best to manage that stress as much as possible. So sometimes we can't necessarily get rid of that stress because of the condition or the situation that we're in. But what we can do is work on our stress management strategies. So, do we journal? Are we doing breath work? Are we taking time away and going out for long walks unplugged, or going out for long walks and listen to some of our favorite music that gets us in a different mood? Whatever it may be that can help kind of break up that chronic stress that we do have going on. So, too much volume or intensity in your training. So, I one of the main factors I ran into whenever I started working with fighters was they would either not strength or do strength and conditioning at all, or they would be doing way too much of the wrong thing. So they would be doing like bodybuilding style workouts, which they're working out 6 days a week, doing body part splits and destroying their muscles, because bodybuilding is you're pretty much trying to break down your muscle as much as possible in order to build it back up as big as possible. But that's not the goal of performance training, strength and conditioning for performance outcomes. For performance outcomes, you want to get a stimulus to adapt. So, a stimulus to build muscle endurance, a stimulus to build strength, a stimulus to build power, not to build a larger muscle per se. Now, in off season, if you have an off season, then yeah, you can take time to build a bigger frame if needed for, let's just say you're smaller in your weight class. Yeah, okay, cool. Maybe we need to build some more mass on your body, but it's not going to be mass that isn't functional. So that's the key there too. So doing way too much in your strength and conditioning work. Also, the other end of the spectrum. So you could be doing a lot of like bodybuilding type of stuff with your resistance training, but then let's just say you're doing way too much cardio or conditioning. So you think that doing a whole bunch of road work is going to make you even more conditioned than the next person. But I really want you to think about this though. The sport, you need to be able to move fast, move in and out. You need to be able to throw powerful shots, right? Like you want to be able to finish somebody. When you're doing shooting for a takedown, you need to be quick. When somebody's trying to take you down, you need to be quick to defend that takedown. So if you're trying to build up those characteristics, running or doing a ton of cardio changes up the composition of your body and how your body expresses those characteristics, and it reduces your body's ability to be fast and be more powerful. When it comes to those specific things, and especially road work. One of my biggest things is just that I'm not a big advocate of doing a ton of road work as a way to condition the body. Again, my whole philosophy is let the sport train you, because when it comes to MMA, boxing, kickboxing, even like pro wrestling, when it comes to those types of sports, inside of that sport, you are conditioning your body to deal with the demands of the sport. If you ever try this, I'll tell you this, try this. If you have it, wear a heart rate monitor while you're doing your pad work, while you're drilling, and see where your heart rate goes, and then also the recovery in between bouts. Do that and you'll understand. And then you can also, if you're doing your conditioning work, wear a heart rate monitor during that work too. And then you'll realize that, oh, I'm doing the exact same thing inside of my skill work, my drilling. I'm doing the exact same thing I'm doing when I'm doing this extra stuff. So if that extra stuff is taking away from your ability to produce power, speed, to be as enduring as possible, to be fresh for your next sessions, then it's taken away from it. It's not contributing to the overall goal of increasing your performance, really. And that kind of like goes back to that fear thing. You think you're not doing enough because you need to be doing some extra stuff, but it's just like, nah, you're doing plenty enough already. So, and then the other thing is just kind of being honest with your coaches. So, if you're not getting enough sleep and then you come in to your session, it's just like, okay, all right. Why are you you seem like you're dragging today? Like, what's going on? Oh, nothing. I'm just like, I'm not into it yet, or I'm not warmed up. It's just like, no, you got 4 hours of sleep last night, or you didn't eat dinner that night and you didn't have breakfast or whatever. You haven't been hydrating, or you got a lot going on in life. Like, hey, open up, talk about those things. Just like, I got a lot going on right now, and I really just can't get it out of my head. Really open up to your coaches about this and try and be as honest as possible. And if you feel like you can't be open with your coach about those things, then that's a problem. Like that's something that needs to be addressed. So make sure that you have that type of relationship that you can open up and tell them about what's going on. If you're that type of athlete, if you're the type of athlete that you don't do that type of stuff, it is what it is. You and your coach, y'all have a understanding of that, but that's not how I coach. I make sure that me and my athletes that I train, we're making sure that we're hitting on all cylinders. They come in, I'm asking, how's everything? How's everything feeling? How's the sleep? What did you eat the night before? What's going on? Like, have you been drinking enough or water? And, just, what's going on in life? Because oftentimes they'll come in and be like, "Yeah, I had this happen, just the other day and, I didn't get any sleep." I'm just like, "All right, so when you come in today, like, just do a little walkthrough. Like, we're not pushing it or don't even do anything at all. Just hop on the bike for a little bit, get moving, get warmed up because I know you got your skill session coming up. So just do that." So being open and honest with your coaches is very imperative to your overall longevity and the improvement of your performance, but not just you as a fighter, but you as a human being. You know what I mean? Um, it's very important to be able to have that type of relationship because you're going to be with that person a lot, and if you can't do that, then you know you definitely need to address that situation. So the other thing is, the other mistake would be ignoring mobility, strength, and lifestyle as key endurance factors. So mobility, I got this silly example in my head. So just think about if somebody just like wrapped you up in saran wrap, right? And you're struggling to move, or if somebody, let's just say, wrap saran wrap around your feet, and then you're trying to walk. You have to use way more energy to walk when it comes to that, right? So the same thing, if your hips are tight as hell, like your hips are bound up and you're trying to throw kicks, it's going to take your body a lot more effort and a lot more energy. Your body's going to utilize a lot more energy in order to perform that kick than it would if you were mobile enough. So every single kick, let's just say you're using 80% energy compared to if you were mobile, you were using 50% energy. And just think about that, how it adds up over the course of rounds. Same thing with punches, same thing with takedowns, same thing with defending takedowns, same thing with grappling exchanges on the ground. If your body's wound up, it's a lot harder for you to move through, or your body has to utilize a lot more energy to move through those movements. So you definitely want to make sure that you address any mobility limitations that you do have when it comes to your performance. And then the next thing is strength. So a lot of people, again, they'll avoid strength training because they think, I know one of the biggest things that they think it'll make them slower, or too bulky. But the thing is, if you're not training like a bodybuilder and you're training appropriately with your strength training, moving weight, but moving with intention and moving fast, then you'll be perfectly fine and you're not doing too much volume of it. You'll be good to go. But just think about this. If you have a stronger hip when you're doing a kick, you're going to utilize less energy to stabilize your body on that leg. Same thing. If you have a more stable and strong shoulder, you're going to utilize less energy when you're trying to hold on to a clinch, when you're trying to hold on or keep somebody down on the ground. If you have stronger hips when you're defending takedowns, it will be less energy expended and less compensations that happen throughout other areas of your body when you're trying to defend that specific takedown. So understand, stronger muscles will make it a lot easier. So you'll use less energy when it comes to doing those specific things: throwing a kick, defending a takedown, throwing a punch, holding the clinch. You'll utilize way less energy. And like I mentioned before, lifestyle, making sure all the lifestyle things are in place. So some of the key foundations, like I just mentioned, strength, but then also muscle endurance. So think about muscle endurance as this. One of the key things that I do is in our strength training sessions or our resistance training sessions, it looks like we do power movement plus a core, and we do our primary strength movements for that day, our strength compound strength movements, and then the next order of movements will be our muscle endurance stuff. So I utilize muscle endurance stuff as kind of like a resilience factor. So it just allows your tendons and ligaments and muscle tissue to build up a little bit more resistance to fatigue, and then also to become stronger, because it takes the tendons and ligaments a little bit longer to adapt to those changes than it does the muscle itself. So that's why, typically when you see training programs, you want to start off with higher repetitions and slowly work yourself into the lower repetition range and lifting heavier weights, because your tendons and your ligaments need a little bit more time to catch up than it would for your muscles. So your muscles can really be pulling on those areas a little bit too much. But I'm kind of getting off. But muscle endurance. So think about this: when your quads blow up, when your grip blows up, If you don't have good muscle endurance in certain areas, key areas that prevent you from blowing up in those areas, then that's going to reduce your conditioning. So, a simple thing to do would be for muscle endurance of the quads. If you want to improve that conditioning, walking lunges, pretty simple. Rear footed elevated split squats, also strengthening the other side of that area, so balancing it out, because if you have an imbalance, or let's just say a major imbalance, because we all are not balanced at all, but if you have a major imbalance, then that's going to increase the demands on that certain area, so that it increase the demands on the quads. So let's just say in muscle endurance work, it'd be 12 plus repetitions. And typically in all my training programs, we're trying to go as hard as possible, at least for that last set. So that way we know we're getting an adaptation, and we know we're going to increase the weight for our next training session. And if we're improving from session to session. So you'll do 12 reps of 3 sets or 2 sets of walking lunges per leg, or rear footed elevated split squats per leg. Same thing with the grip. We'll do dumbbell rows or landmine rows, and the key thing here is, yeah, no, we're not doing wrist curls, or we're not doing towel rolls or anything like that. What we're doing is strengthening the primary area that needs to be enduring and strong and stable, which is the back and the scapula, in order to reduce what's the strain on what's going on down the line. So the forearm, the grip there. Because if we have a strong base, then everything down the chain can work more efficiently, instead of having that compensation pattern going, and then you feeling like you're more fatigued out because you have to, or your body's compensating and moving in different ways to try and accommodate for a weak area or a less enduring muscular area. So if your body doesn't have to go through those compensations, you're going to utilize less energy, you're going to utilize less accessory muscle, so less energy output and more energy that's conserved, therefore improving your conditioning. So muscle endurance plays a huge factor into that. And the majority of the time is going to come from the resistance training, and then also your skill work of performing those specific movements over and over again. The next thing, as I mentioned before, mobility and movement efficiency. So, fighters with poor mobility waste energy just trying to move. Clean mobility gives you better movement economy, less strain and compensation, as I mentioned before, smoother striking and grappling transitions. Like, again, if you're going through a scramble and you don't have really good mobility, you're going to really be using a lot of accessory muscles. You're going to be trying to fight the mobility that you don't have in order to get in and out of those exchanges. The same thing with your striking. If you don't have that hip extension or that abduction, if you don't have that mobility in your hips, going to be a lot harder for you to throw those kicks, or your body's going to use more energy. If you don't have that proper rotation in your upper back, if you don't have that rotation in your hips, it's going to be harder for you to throw those punches as efficiently as possible without you utilizing a lot of energy. To switch up stances, when you switch up to the opposite stance, do you have way more limitations on the other side than the side you're strongest in? That's going to play a huge factor into how effective your strikes may be on that other side. And it reduces the power output. But we're not focusing on that right now. We're focusing on conditioning and energy utilization. So, better movement economy. Understand, when I say movement economy, that just means like your movement efficiency. And we know in the strength and conditioning world that movement economy, how efficiently you move, is the primary factor into how conditioned you are with that specific thing that you have efficiency in. So, for instance, we all look at runners and long distance runners as the primary gold standard of endurance. So, I can understand why people just like, oh, yeah, to improve your endurance, you need to run more. But understand this, running is their sport. So, they are performing their sport on a day to day basis to get better at their running economy. The more efficient they are at running, the easier it is to perform their sport. So it goes back to what I was saying about the fighter. The more times you participate or you perform your skill, the more drill sessions, the more pad sessions, the more bag work you do. And it's not always like going all out or hard, but you're perfecting your movement, how you move through your footwork, your defense. You're perfecting all of those things so you waste less energy doing those things. And I'm not a person that, I know understand the skill and all that stuff about pad work and stuff, but it's just kind of like the common sense transfer over. If you're better and more efficient at the movement of your specific sport, then you're going to utilize less energy thinking about how to accomplish that movement, and your body's going to fluidly go through those specific tasks at that. So the same thing, like I said, with the runners, they're doing running, but every session isn't a hard run. Some of those runs are easy runs. So that would be the same thing with your specific skill as a fighter. Every pad session isn't going to be a hard pad session. Every bag work session isn't going to be a hard one. Some of them are more skill based, so you're not going as hard during that session. So, not trying to jump into somebody else's realm, but just kind of translating that over so you kind of get the understanding of what I mean by conditioning. Because I feel like this just like that's why we're talking about this. This gets messed up a lot. And then once again, I'm not downing anybody. It's just like understanding that, hey, you're already doing probably enough conditioning for your sport right now. So here's a big statement here. So, recovery. You won't build conditioning without sleep, food, and hydration, period. Stress management, downtime, and proper recovery protocols are non negotiable. So here's some other things that we need to talk about here. So this thing called lactic work. I want you to think about like if you were on a bike and you were doing sprints or whatnot for up to about 45 seconds to a minute. I used to do this when I trained CrossFit. Lactic training or lactic testing work was terrible. So it might be like a 500-meter row all out. Understand you're not going all out the whole entire time. But this type of work just kinda, like, prepared you for the type of training or the actual sport that you were going to be participating in. Now, what happens here, typically in the fighter realm is what I see, people will go on the assault bike, and they'll go all out for an extended period of time blowing up their legs and call it doing like lactic work or well they won't call it anything specific, but they'll do this type of work, and it's just kind of fatigue work, and they're trying to do it in order to prepare the mind, sometimes to mentally be able to handle the output of a fight or whatnot. But again, my biggest thing here is that when you're doing your sparring training and you're going hard or you're doing hard rounds when you're drilling, it's just like you're already doing that type of mental training with that work and in a fatigue state as well. So doing this really for most combat sports, it's short burst and recovery, right? Unless you're going through like a whole entire like grappling exchange, it's a lot of short bursts in and out, a few combinations and back out, and then recovery. If you're trying to finish somebody, then that's a whole nother animal. But at the same time, it's still not like crazy. You're still picking your shots. Once again, if we go into the next thing, which is fight IQ, you're picking your shots. You're not just throwing crazy. But lactic work is it should be rare. I'm sorry, I'm getting that mixed up. So whenever you're doing this type of fatigue work, so if you're doing the work to rest ratio to where you're going all out and then you're doing a shorter rest to where you don't have the same power output in the next set, or because your athlete knows that they're doing all out and they have a short time period, they may kind of like hold back. So they're not doing true all out work. Whenever you're doing this work to really blow up your legs, it's going to be less power output. Well, you're reducing your body's ability to produce power overall. So you're kind of fighting against the strength adaptations that you're making, the speed adaptations, the power adaptations that you're getting from your strength conditioning work, your strength work, your resistance training sessions. And then you're also making your body less enduring. So you're making your body less enduring because your body's trying to focus on like the buffer capacity. Whenever you do that type of training, it causes a lot of different byproducts that reduce your body's ability to function appropriately. So, for instance, your cells like the mitochondria. Sometimes, if you have too much of those accumulated byproducts, they can damage or allow your mitochondria to not allow, but they can prevent your mitochondria from functioning appropriately. But not trying to get too scientific here because I don't even want to mess up the scientific terminology right now. And but just understand this. Mitochondria, your energy production powerhouse cells, if they're not functioning appropriately, then you're not producing energy appropriately and efficiently over an extended period of time and while in your performance. So we want to make sure we're doing the right amount of work and we're not just doing work because we believe that it's something extra that we need to be doing. My one of my biggest philosophies is that I would prefer us go in and learn and be like, I feel like my conditioning wasn't there. And it could be like, okay, why do you say that? You feel like your conditioning wasn't there. Oh, because my grip like fell off during the match, or I couldn't, maintain these positions. I got really gassed during this position. And it's just like in my head, when I think about it, I think you just need more exposure to those type of situations. You need more exposure to those positions instead of being like, okay, you just need to do this extra cardio. Because if you really think about it, doing, let's just say, extra road work or doing more bike intervals or road intervals over, let's just say, you're gassing out during when you're getting pressed up against the cage, or you're gassing out as you're trying to close off your opponent when they're going around the ring or whatnot, or your quads are fatiguing out. It's just like, okay, well, you just probably need more exposure to that type of movement more consistently over an extended period of time. That would transfer over a lot more effectively than you doing a ton of road work or anything like that. And one of my biggest harps, I'm going back to the road work thing, is just that if you're not efficient at running, also you're a bigger athlete, you have bad ankle mobility, your knees are already kind of like jacked up, and you're an older fighter, like it may be a lot harder for you to actually perform those things. And it just may be more draining on your body than beneficial. So you wouldn't want to do anything that's going to be a detriment to your performance over an extended period of time. That's all when it comes to that. So getting into the next thing is fight IQ. So fight IQ, you have better decision making, pacing, reduces wasted effort. Oh, better decision making and pacing, which reduces wasted effort. And fighters with high IQs conserve energy and recover faster during. So again, it's like you're not taking unnecessary shots. Let's just say trying to do takedowns or whatnot. You're setting things up more effectively. So let's just say if you're an inexperienced fighter, you might see an inexperienced fighter that has a strong wrestling background, and then they're going in for so many different takedowns, but they didn't set anything up. So they're utilizing a lot of energy to try and get this takedown. But if they were to set things up, they had more tools in their tool bag to set up their shots. Then now they're going to be using less energy because they're not going to be taking as many takedowns as they will before. Same thing with strikers. So if you ever see some of the most like skilled strikers in the UFC, they're like doing feints, like pacing themselves, doing little shots or like shots that don't have as much oomph behind them. Like fighters who are inexperienced, they're kind of trying to take people's heads off with every single shot that they do, or every single punch or kick or whatnot, instead of throwing something light here, throwing something a little bit heavier there, and then taking that hard shot. um so it's just those things. So understanding and being like a more efficient, precise fighter and knowing when to go and when to pull back is going to conserve a lot more energy. And also you've been in there for a while. Like you've been in there multiple times, so you utilize less energy overall because you're not so nervous about the situation. I'll put it that way. Or you're not frantic in certain situations because you've been there before. And that's the whole thing about more experience. The more experience you get, the less that specific moment is going to stress you out because you've been there before, and then you understand like the nuances behind it. So one, you're not thinking too much about it. You know your moves and you know your positions. And then two, that's going to be less overall fatigue your body's going under during that time frame. But getting into the next thing, which is like I said before, sleep. So adaptation happens when you're sleeping. Poor sleep leads to higher fatigue, slower recovery, and reduced training effects. So if you just had, let's just say, a skill session on Tuesday night, you go home, you get 3 hours of sleep, you come into your next training session, then you're just like, oh yeah, I'm about to do that move. And then you're just like, for some apparent reason, you can't put it together. Your body learns and consolidates all the things that you learned the day before while you're sleeping. So that's a huge factor for skill acquisition. But then training effects. So if you just did a session like you just did and your body became more efficient, you were just like, oh yeah, I got it down now for that takedown or for that jab or for that kick or for that clinch position. Just like, oh, I got that down now. Or if it's during your strength conditioning work and you're just like, ah, yeah, I felt stronger during that session. But then the day before, on the next week, the next training session, you didn't get much sleep, and then you come back and you're just like, yo, what's going on? You didn't get enough sleep, and you need to sleep because your body adapts while you're sleeping. So that's just another thing of being conscious and aware of the factors outside of what you're doing inside of the gym that affect how your body adapts and how well conditioned you'll be. Hydration, even mild dehydration reduces endurance, power output, and decision making. Stay hydrated all day, not just during training. So you think just like downing water before training or in training and then a little bit afterwards is not going to cut it. You have to be precise about like how much you're hydrating and staying on top of that. Just kind of like being a professional about it. Um and I understand if you don't know the nuances behind it, learn. Ask questions. Ask your coaches like how much should I be drinking? If they don't know, maybe have them point you in the right direction so you can get the information that you need in order to hydrate appropriately. So, reduces decision making. Once again, you can't make quick decisions if you're dehydrated. Your brain's dehydrated. So it's not going to function at its peak. So understand if your skills are feeling like a little flat that day, it may be because you're dehydrated, or just kind of look into your hydration and look into your sleep. And like I said before, stress. High stress raises baseline fatigue, wrecks sleep, and limits recovery. Managing stress improves conditioning more than extra cardio ever will. So if your stress level baseline or your fatigue level baseline is already higher because you're stressed, then you don't have much extra in your cup to put more fatigue in. And once you do that, it starts to overflow. And what we see with the overflow is typically overuse injuries, constant aching of joints. You don't have the speed that you have. Power output seems low. Your mental capacity is just a little off. You feel like you feel disconnected from your training. You can get sick very easily with that when your stress is very high and is chronic. Sleep, sleep disturbances. If for some apparent reason you're doing all the things, right? Like you're taking your supplements before bed, you're doing your journaling if needed, you're doing your relaxation, your breath work, all before you go to bed and before you sleep. But for some apparent reason, like you can't either fall asleep or you can't stay asleep, you may want to look at your stress levels, your overall stress, and then your recovery. If your body's, when you're stressed, your body is utilizing all your energy resources in order to recover from that stress or in order to combat that stress. Now it can't use those extra resources to build up your body from the training that you did the day before. So if you just had your strength conditioning session, your body can't utilize the resources to build up and increase your performance from that session if you're chronically stressed. The pad work that you just did, your body can't adapt to the pad session that you just had, the bag session that you just had, to adapt the body to be able to perform that at a higher level. It can't do that effectively if you have that high stress going on because all of its resources is going towards combating that stress. So, this one is a long one, and I'm gonna try and get through this next portion. This is more of the prescription part here on when to add extra conditioning in, and because I've put in extra conditioning in some of my athletes' programs. So when to add extra conditioning and what it looks like. So only add structured conditioning when I have a fighter that is heavily out of shape and not in camp. Typically, I've learned that their coaches will make them work so hard to where it's just like they're trying to condition them for it. Um, Especially like one of the wrestling coaches. I remember one of the fighters I was working with. His wrestling coach was like, "All right, we got to get you into shape," and they were doing some hard drills. So if I were to try to add any extra conditioning in, it would just contribute to more fatigue than it would actually help out. So I just let that be what it was, and just did the strength conditioning stuff to kind of build some more body armor. I'll call it that. So when you're out of shape and not in camp. The next thing is they can't spar or drill due to injury, but still needs to maintain capacity. So if you're injured and you can't do certain things, then yes, we have to, keep that rate up, that heart rate up in certain instances because you're not getting that during your normal sessions that you would have gotten in if you weren't injured. The next area is there's a clear aerobic or repeat sprint gap not caused by pacing or technique. Basically, your conditioning isn't where it needs to be, and it's not because you're not skilled with your sport and you don't have good pacing. It's something that's off there. But I'll say this again, oftentimes it is a lifestyle thing. I mean, if you've ever seen some of the documentaries with some of the UFC fighters or high profile fighters, some of them do not have the best lifestyle, such as diet and sleeping appropriately and managing their stress. Some of them don't have the best lifestyle, but they get away with it because they are so skilled. But I want you to remember, like, that's the exception and is not the rule, okay? So, some examples of kinda like, people will say, like, zone 2 training, or they'll call it, like, building your aerobic capacity or your aerobic base. But just understand this, it's way simpler than most people think, and it's a little bit more nuanced. Again, if you're doing your sport, you're gonna be very well conditioned. And if you're doing all the lifestyle stuff outside of that, your body adapts and you're able to you have a lot better recovery capacity than you would if you weren't recovered in that area. Now, if you're just doing walks, and for most people, even bigger fighters, that sometimes if you're on the bike, you can be going out of, let's just say, that aerobic or zone 2 um zone. And I don't even like using that terminology or those terms. Just understand, like, if you're building an aerobic base, all it is you just doing work that is consistent over an extended period of time to where you can have a conversational pace. If you're walking for 30 to 60 minutes, that is plenty enough, and you can do that multiple days out of the week. You walk for 30 to 60 minutes. You use a ruck on your back. You wear a weight vest. You do sled drags for 30 minutes or so. Very lightweight or just the sled itself, depending on you. Light machines. Sometimes athletes with um higher power expression can't actually do that type of machine in order to build up an aerobic base because they still end up doing fatigue based work without even knowing it, because it's just how their muscles are designed to contract. So that's why, like, the safe bet would be going out just doing 30 to 60 minutes of weighted vest walks or just walks in general. So a simple progression could be like this, right? So you do 30-minute walks 4 days a week or 5 days a week, depending on like how much energy you do have and how much you actually need extra. So let's just keep it at 3 days a week, right? After your strength and conditioning session, you go out for a 30-minute walk. After your two strength and conditioning sessions, you go out for a 30-minute walk. And then on, let's just say, after your sparring session, you go out for a 30-minute walk on the weekend day or whatnot. And then over time, after that 30-minute walk, you're just like, okay, that's, pretty easy for my body. You can wear your heart rate monitor there as well. Then you add a weight vest or you add a ruck. And then you do that same thing. Or I'm sorry, you build from 30 minutes to 60 minutes. And those feel good. You don't feel any fatigue in any areas or any extra ankle discomfort or hip discomfort or knee discomfort from those things. And then you build up to a weight vest walk, so you're walking around with a weight vest for 30 minutes, and then you go for 60 minutes. And this could be a weight vest or a ruck. And after you do that for an extended period of time, and this isn't like so like quickly done. Like, you might do the 30 minutes for a month, and then you might do the 60 minutes for another month, and then you might do the 30 minutes with a weight vest for a month. And then so this is over the course of a year that you're doing this, right? This whole entire thing, to try and build up that aerobic baseline, let's just say that. Um, so that's one way to think about it. And you could also use the incline treadmill as well. The next thing is 20 to 30 minutes conversational pace of circuits. So one of my fighters, I was using this with him, and we would do, it was a damper setting on the rower or the bike at about like a 1 or a 2. So it was very light, and it was at easy effort. So they were going on the rower or the bike for maybe like 1 minute or so. and then they would go to the, let's say, bike and then row for 1 minute, and then they would do some carries, and then maybe some isometrics such as some forearm planks, some hip bridges, and then also maybe some side planks or some step ups. So all the movements that are very easy and light for the body to go through, and they would just make sure that it's at a conversational pace. So that's kind of like making your body move through all these ranges of motion. And this is for those people who like walk for 30 to 60 minutes. They're just like, nah, I can't do that. And I'm not going to do that. I'd rather do the circuits. It's like, okay. But just understanding the circuits, you're not doing things that are like fast and hard, like you're contracting your muscles very hard and you're doing a lot of like, let's say, eccentrics like air squats or walking lunges or anything like that. You're doing more so isometric type of movements. um and then also just muscle endurance focused training with proper tempo and rest. So again, like I said before and earlier, muscle endurance training is a very good way as a fighter to train conditioning. Here are some other optional conditioning tools, and I'm trying to wrap this thing up because we are going long. But I knew this one was going to be a long one here because it's one I'm very passionate about, and I just want to make sure that you all get the best advice from me that you possibly can. But we can't do it all in one episode. But we're going to hit the bases. Optional conditioning tools at least one time a week. I don't try and do any extra than that. If we can do, my philosophy again, if we can do less and still get benefit from it, let's continue to do less and get benefit from it because our body's adapting. We have more recovery capacity, to add in maybe more skill work that we need to catch up on. Right. So if we can do less outside of our sport specific stuff and still get adaptations and still increase our performance, we're golden. All right. So the tools, power sprints. So just all out sprint work. This, again, can only be expressed by people who have experience with resistance training over an extended period of time and they've been doing it consistently. So it'd be like 10 to 15 seconds of all out work with full recovery. The full recovery, maybe up to 2.5 minutes to 3 to 5 minutes of recovery for like 6 to 8 sets or so. And this is max effort. Again, if you do these sprints, right? And then you're taking your rest and you're just like, you know what? Like, I don't really need that much rest. And then you hop back on and you put out the same score or even a higher score, then you're actually not expressing maximal power output because you're not strong enough to express that power output. So your system just has to learn to tap into that. So you're really not doing power work. So just understand that what you're actually accomplishing here is going to end up being aerobic work in general, like aerobic intervals or so. Uh, Fight paced intervals. So I see this a lot. People will try and mimic, the time frame that you would have in a fight, and how it kind of goes. So it'd be like 30 seconds hard, 60 seconds at maybe a moderate pace, and then like a 1 minute complete rest. And you'll do that for a certain amount of time. And it just depends on like your specific rounds. If it's 3 minute rounds, if it's 5 minute rounds, whatever your rounds are, it just depends on that, how you do those intervals. But you can use this, but again, it's not an all out pace. It's just like, okay, you're gonna go hard for a little bit, you're gonna go at a moderate pace for a little bit, that's you moving around, and then you're gonna continue to do that back and forth until your 3 minutes is up or until your 5 minutes is up, and then you're gonna take your full rest. So you're just kind of mimicking what you would do in a normal fight. So that's another way to kind of do some conditioning work. Again, if you're less experienced, you're gonna get way more benefit by doing your actual sport that way, and doing your skills training than you would by adding this extra in that takes away from your ability to perform your skill work in an effective manner. Now, I harp on runs, but if you are going to do any type of running, short runs, if your joints allow, so hill sprints and short intervals only. Avoid pavement and long distance jogs. It kills me seeing fighters running on pavement. When I seen some of my fighters that I would train in the gym and I would see them on Instagram showing their feet running on pavement, I'm just like, ouch, ouch, ouch. And when they would come in, hey coach, my knee, hey coach, my hip. And I'm just like, man, I mean, you are killing your joints by doing all of that road work. But Again, I didn't earn their trust yet. I just started working with them. I can't tell them, like, don't do this, don't do that. I can tell them, but that doesn't mean that they're going to listen in general. And again, it goes back to that thing that I said before. If you have fear of that you're not conditioned enough, old philosophies that aren't necessarily tested or explained with some nuance behind it. Road work has been in the fight culture for since the fight culture has been alive, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I've seen it we've seen it in the Rocky movies, we've seen it in documentaries of them doing road work. If you watch anime, Hajime no Ippo, we seen him doing like a lot of road work. It's in that culture, and I'm not here to bash any method. What I am here is to say, like, hey, let's think about it in a more nuanced way. Like, there's a lot more that goes into it than just this. So let's try and adapt and try some new methods of approaching this thing. And that's what I do with my fighters. And it's been successful so far. We haven't really done a ton of road work, and especially with some of my older fighters who, have a lot of banged up knees and ankles from, just their experience. So they can't do all that road work. But yeah, as I was saying, if you're doing hill sprints, that's another good one. But again, you're doing the hill sprint and then you're taking a rest period, a complete rest period, and then you're sprinting back up again. So this is power output work. This is you getting yourself conditioned to do short bursts, and you're fully recovering. So that way, it's not fatigue based work and taken away from your actual skill sessions the next day and impeding your recovery. The reason why hill sprints are more effective and less fatiguing is because you're not doing so much eccentric damage to your body. Because on as you're going up the hill, think about a step up. It's a concentric motion, and it doesn't break down the muscle tissue as much as an eccentric motion would. So the eccentric motion, the elongating of the muscle, and as you do it multiple times under load, it starts to tear and break that muscle down. But when you're doing more concentric stuff, you don't do that same effect to the muscle. Okay. But we won't dive into that too much. But like I said, short, short sprints, hill sprints, run intervals, specifically do those intervals on a track. If you have a track nearby, I mean, maybe even a grass field where you could do some circuits around there that don't have potholes in them. Do them in those areas. It's going to be, your body is going to thank you. It's going to be way more forgiving on your joints going in, and you won't be so banged up for the next days to come. Okay. So, key reminders: skill work is your best form of conditioning. Perform your sport. Strength and mobility improve your ability to use your gas tank. Recovery is the limiter, not always conditioning itself. More isn't better, appropriate is better. So, like I said before, I work with plenty of fighters who felt out of shape and they thought they needed more conditioning. One of my fighters, before I started working with them, they were doing a ton of conditioning just because they thought that that's what they needed to do. But then they started working with me, and they were just like, "Yo, like this, I don't think this is enough." But the key thing is once they started doing our training, which was 2 days a week of full body resistance training and no conditioning work outside of that, but their sport. They felt way more fresh for their sport. They were able to perform a lot better. They were having fun inside of their training. So yeah, man, it's that. Also, like, I realized over the course of time of training a fighter that I do have, they'll be like, "Yo, like I'm kind of beat from this," and it's just like, "All right, well, we can't do this session now. We're not gonna really get anything out of it." So it ended up just kind of cutting down in the majority of the time. It just ended up being 2 days of resistance training and maybe one extra day of some type of maybe intervals that are actually conditioning intervals, not fatigue based intervals, or power short burst work, or it might have been that circuit around the world stuff that I was talking about before. So that's what we would typically do. All right. So I want you to ask yourself these questions here. Am I conditioning out of fear or with intention? The next question is my fatigue coming from a gas tank issue or a recovery and movement issue? And I'm going to finish off with this. You don't need more punishment to get in shape. You need more clarity. Real conditioning supports your performance, it doesn't break you down. So if you're doing proper conditioning work, it's not going to impede on your performance. You won't go in the next day feeling like your ankles and your hips and your knees are kind of fatigued or banged up. You won't go into your skill session feeling like you just don't have the juice that you had the day before. If it does that, then it's hurting your performance more so than it is improving your performance. And that's all I have for you. I say that's all I have for you, but that was a long one. But if this helped you, feel free to share it with any of your teammates, your coaches, um, anybody else that you feel that they can benefit from this. Like share this. That is all I ask. And if you're not subscribed already, please subscribe. I'm here to share information. And if there's anything that I can be doing better with this podcast, then let me know in the comments. And I'll be sure to make those adjustments as seen fit. As always, I appreciate you listening and showing up. And let's change the culture. I'll see you in the next one.